Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here on this September 23rd. My name is Nick Kanoki, and I am the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm calling in from Lander, Wyoming. Today we have Jesse Rothkoff with Lifecycle Engineering. And before we get our program underway, I just want to thank our September ALN Thursday at 4 sponsor, ABS Group. And you can find out more about ABS Group and our patron sponsors at these web links below. That's ABS Quality Evaluations and Onuma System. And our organizational members, as you see here before you, they make this program and other programs that the Asset Leadership Network does possible. So we are incredibly grateful for their continuing support, of which Lifecycle Engineering is one. And one more plug for next week's Thursday at 4 with Kimon Onuma, president of Onuma Inc. and patron member, as you saw, of Onuma System. That will be next Thursday at this time, September 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And with that, I would just like to say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So send any comments, questions, or feedback in the chat. And if it's relevant, we'll put it to Jesse. And now Mike Bordnero, I think, has a few more event updates.
Yes, I've been looking forward to talk to Jesse on this program for a while. But first, it seems like ever since Jesse and LCE joined, the ALN have really been going up. And part of what we're enjoying next week is an event with the Government Finance Officers Association. We've connected Governor Martin O'Malley to their program on urban wealth funds, and that is on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then at 4 p.m., we have Mark West from ABS Group talking about our ALN ABS Group white paper on the power industry. And he's got one of his colleagues joining, and I'm really excited about that also. So without further ado, Jesse Rothkoff, what meeting we first had. I just randomly called because one of our board members, Rich Culbertson, said, "What about these guys?" And I looked in our database and Jesse's phone number was there. He's been following us. I called him. Luckily, he picked up. And then 90 minutes later, he said, "Mike, I got to go. We got another meeting." I mean, so we're going to be able to do 30 minutes standing on our head. So you're the managing director at LCE.
Yes.
Why, before we talk about what you do there, why don't we talk about how you got there? How did you get where you're at in your asset management journey?
Thanks, Mike. I think it's probably similar to a lot of us out there. It's, a little bit of a happy accident to end up in asset management. As prior to being involved in asset management, I was 20 years in the international shipping business, transportation, containerized cargo, and air freight. And I wrote a patent for automating the customs clearance for shipping containers, and that connected me with IBM. And I worked for IBM for a few years in that capacity. And then that program shut down at IBM, and I moved into a group that was involved in supply chain and asset management, and spent 10 years working with IBM on implementations of Maximo, mostly working with government entities, municipal governments, transit agencies, airports and seaports and organizations like that, and then moved to Lifecycle about 5 years ago.
Okay. So thank you, by the way, for picking up the phone that day.
Yeah, that's great.
Jesse and I are already planning events. We're working on a ALN LCE white paper on resiliency, which is really shaping up. That's going to be a very beneficial document in our library. Before we talk about that, why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing with LCE?
Sure. So I'm the managing principal for lifecycle engineering
Managing
for
principal, not
the transportation and non-manufacturing. So lifecycle engineering, we do a lot of work with the people and process side of asset management. We're from a technology point of view, we're a little bit solution agnostic. We don't sell software, but we help organizations align their people and their processes with those technology tools in order to optimize their physical assets. So my portfolio is really looking at transit agencies or airports, seaports, hospitals, state and local governments, and helping those asset intensive organizations optimize their overall asset management program. That's how I started getting involved with the resiliency side of this as well.
Okay. So your patent indicates that you have a technology bent, and how are you using technology in your current position?
Right. So, interestingly enough, I've never been a huge technology person, but implementing the technology and learning how to use that technology to optimize operations or optimize some sort of process or processes. So in the asset management world, we see a lot of customers that are going out there and implementing new systems, whether it's a computerized maintenance management system like Maximo we're in for, and running into problems. The technology might be implemented technically correct, but they still run into problems when they get into issues around training the workforce to use that technology properly, or the people defining the processes to the implementers are not the same people that are actually carrying out those processes on the shop floor. So what we do is try to bring that whole culture together with the use of the technology, make sure that the processes are in alignment with the way that the people are doing the work, or maybe we have to realign the way that people are doing the work to meet those new processes and make sure that the processes are properly reflected in the technology tools.
Okay. And then you've been very excited about Atlas. Can you tell us about LCE's Atlas?
Sure. So Atlas is a product that we initially started to make sure that all of our consultants were using the exact same playbook on how to help our customers get that alignment and build that culture of reliability within the organization. And once we started writing that down, we realized we had, really some very interesting intellectual property there. It's a playbook, like a step-by-step playbook on how to get your organization from wherever you are on that asset management maturity curve to the next steps. And it is kind of replete with organizational change management tools, with asset management tools like FMEA templates, Weibull calculators, job descriptions, and it takes the whole organization and walks you through that change, that transformation to bring a whole culture of reliability into the organization, working a lot with the senior stakeholders of the organization to be visible and active and set the tone for a transformation.
Which leads us right to the next thing. One of the things that Jesse and I have really bonded over is our mutual understanding that this type of improvement, the dramatic mission success improvements that can occur, have to be driven from the top.
That's right.
The fact that you've got that built into Atlas is very interesting. Can you talk about that and just leadership involvement in general?
Sure. I mean, we have seen repeatedly over and over again that the biggest predictor of success or failure on any kind of asset management project is the active and visible leadership of the senior members. So we typically target that C-suite, the CEO or chief asset officer as our primary stakeholders, and work with them to make sure that they're setting a clear understanding of the need for that asset management change throughout the organization. It follows the ISO 55000 line of sight through the organization. Make sure that everybody understands why we're going through this process, how it's going to affect the overall organization, and then we get down into the details, sort of cascading through from senior leadership to the next level down, all the way down to the shop floor on what does that mean for me and for my job.
Yeah, I had seen in the building industry so much trying to drive change from the grassroots, and it just does not happen. So how do you involve, what are some of the things you do when you involve leaders?
Yeah, so we have a whole organizational change management program built into the transformation, and part of that is a communications plan where we begin with senior leadership, stating the purpose of the change. Why are we going through this difficult change? And it's always difficult with asset management. And then that starts to get into discussions between the CEO and the next line down, the leadership level of the organization, and then those leaders down to the senior managers and shop foremen and on down. It's really, we have a coaching plan through each step of that, and we work with those leaders to identify any thoughts that they might have or any doubts that they might have, if there's resistance within their own thinking or within the people that are working with them, how to approach that resistance and mitigate it and get people on board and start bringing the whole team together.
So I was talking with somebody else about the resistance that can occur. And if the resistance is at a manager level, or don't worry, this will pass, it's going to sink everything. Have you ever experienced a leader who had to get rid of somebody who wasn't going along with the change management plan?
Quite a few times. Asset management transformation, it's always a little bit painful. People don't really want to change. It's hard to tell an organization that's been doing asset management their way for maybe decades or even in some cases centuries, how to run their business. So yes, we've seen it where people say, this is just the latest flavor, it'll pass. And we try really hard to bring those folks on board. If you can bring them into the fold, they often become your best champions. But if they're going to reject it, and they're going to resist the change, it is something that needs to be dealt with. And we'll work with the senior leaders to try to get that person converted and singing the gospel a little bit. And we explain the repercussions if that doesn't happen as well.
Yeah, that can only happen when you have that tight connection to top leadership.
That's right.
So that's good. Admiral Allen spoke at one of our events and said, I pull people through a very small hole. And either you determine if you're going to fit through the hole or you don't fit through the hole. So yeah, strong leadership is totally necessary. And I like that you're interested in addressing that leadership issue. And you'll be talking in one of our panels during the annual event on that. But you'll also be talking about resiliency
Right.
in the white paper. So can you give us a little preview of why you thought this was an important topic to address through asset management?
Right. So this is something that you and I have spoken a lot about, Mike, and really what organizations need to think about resilience as part of their asset management program. I mean, COVID-19 has taught us that you can have disruptions or emergencies out in the world that can snowball, and the supply chains fall apart. People might have to start working remotely. It really becomes a major disruption to business operations. The time to, like with asset management, the time to plan for that is now. You don't want to be in the middle of a major disruption and trying to come up with a plan for resilience at that point. It's too late, and you're already competing for resources with the rest of the world. So what we are trying to do is tie that resilience to the asset management program. The two go very much hand in hand. Resilience of the people, resilience of the assets, and that ties directly to your strategic asset management plan. It helps to ensure a continuity of operations and mission success. So it really ties very closely with the ISO 55000 approach to asset management, and needs to become more and more part of that program.
Yes, and sometimes it's the idea of planning for emergencies that can help people get over the resistance to change. If you start talking to them about a pain point or a potential pain point and how to avoid it, sometimes that's a good place to start.
Right, and COVID-19 has taught us a lot about that. The other aspect of that is it's a good way to engage people in what needs to happen in those types of disruptive emergency situations, but the same tools, similar processes perhaps, can be used in everyday operations. That's another aspect of this. You don't want to be in a disruptive event or an emergency situation and having your people starting to use new tools and new processes. So what we want to do is try to make sure that those protocols for a disruptive event are the same types of protocols, the same types of technology and tools used in your everyday operation, so that everybody's familiar. And when a disruption happens, people can easily step into their changed role there.
Okay, our CEO, Jim Dieter, wonders if you have a favorite success story of how you've helped a client with their asset management journey.
Wow. I did a massive strategic asset management transformation project with the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I think that's one of my favorite projects. There's two real big favorites. That's one of them. And the part that made that a success was the change management piece of this. Veterans Affairs, it's a complicated organization. They've been around for centuries, and they have a lot of different interests in the organization. So we started working with each one of those departments, identifying, what's in it for me or what's in it for them, making them aware of the changes that are coming and building some desire for them to kind of adopt that new change. And it took some cycles before we got it through. The transformation, the implementation of the software alone just took a few years, but it took a couple times with that organization to get it to really stick and get adopted throughout the organization, so that the people that are on the shop floor, the nurses, the doctors, everybody were using the tools properly and willingly.
Excellent. And what's your other one?
The other one was the Golden Gate Bridge, which was my first asset management project, and that was back in the early 2000s, and we were replacing a CMMS system. I was at IBM at the time, and we were replacing an old CMMS system with Maximo. But it was one of the first projects where we built in some IIoT, or Digital 4.0 technology. The Golden Gate Bridge District has the Golden Gate Bridge, a fleet of ferries, and a fleet of buses. And the biggest part of the project was the bus fleet, where we would bring those buses in for their nightly refueling. And when we put the diesel nozzle into the bus, that consummated a data exchange and pulled information out of the onboard computer on the bus and ran it through Maximo, and it would determine whether any number of factors were out of tolerance. So exhaust pressure, or temperature, or tire pressure, anything that the computer would capture would go through Maximo, and we would get either a green light or a red light, and put that bus either over towards the mechanic shop or back out on the road. And the net was they were able to reduce their fleet of buses by about 40%, just because they didn't have as many buses stuck on the side of the road. They were much more in compliance with regulatory requirements as well, and reduced the number of fines that they had. It was a big success for those guys.
Awesome. And you got to see some great views. Did you get behind the scenes at the bridge at all?
Yeah, we actually got to go up in the tower to the very top of the bridge, and that was pretty exciting. And my office for about a year and a half was right there at the toll booths at the Golden Gate Bridge, looking over the actual Golden Gate. It was just a fabulous project. Great people to work with. Really a lot of fun.
Excellent. And then going back to the VA, Ed Safdie, who's with Grant Thornton, used to be there, and he is joining with Art Curlin, who is online here watching from University Health, and they're going to be talking about the Healthcare Asset Leadership Board, and maybe you might want to join that panel also, but I won't force you to make a decision right now.
Sure. Sounds great.
Can you tell us a success story from LCE, something that you've recently implemented?
Well, one of the projects that we're working on right now is with Long Island Railroad, and that's an implementation of Infor. And this is actually Maximo was the CMM railroad for years. New York MTA, of which is the parent for Long Island Railroad, determined that they were going to do a centralized strategy for asset management, but allow it to be federated out to the different agencies. And so Long Island Railroad, New York Subways, Transit, Metro North, they could each implement their own way of doing business, but there were certain pieces and processes that had to come back to the headquarters to allow them to make better decisions around asset management and better visibility into the life cycle of those assets. So we're now, we just signed a contract to extend it for our fourth, fifth, and sixth year at that project. We're really starting to engage with the entire organization. In the past, it was just the track side of the house, and now we're dealing with the rolling stock folks, which are just another great group of people that I've worked with in the past on some other asset management issues. So it's exciting, and they're moving forward.
That's something that we've been hearing from many organizations, that they start off with one asset category, and when they see the benefits, they spread it out.
So common way to do that: get a pilot going and land and expand.
Land and expand. I had not heard that. That's a good one. Then how are people seeing certification to ISO 55001 in your opinion?
Well, I mean, this is something you and I have talked about. I'd like to see more of it in the United States. I think we're seeing much more in the past few years, much more of a focus on asset management. We're starting to see directors of reliability, chief asset officers. It seems like we're in a little bit of a pre-renaissance around asset management in my mind, but there's still not quite enough focus on ISO 55000. The people that are deep into asset management, they get it and they understand it, but trying to build the executive sponsorship is a challenge in some organizations. So I think, as a country, especially in public infrastructure, we have a little bit more work to do there to get people to understand how to build that culture of reliability, and ISO 55000 really kind of provides a great framework to do that. Once we get those people exposed to that ISO 55000 framework, they're usually sold, but it takes a while.
So thank you for joining the Asset Leadership Network to help us do that, because that is our mission. We have settled on advancing a structured approach to asset management, because that sounds nice and generic, like you were talking about. You're being generic about your software, but from our opinion, ISO 55000 is the best in the history of mankind approach to asset management. So if you're going to use a structure, we kind of recommend that one.
We do too. And everything that we do is built on that framework, whether the clients are going for certification or not. We encourage them to actually go for certification, but regardless, we're building their program on that framework.
Okay, so we've got Scott Smith concurring that leadership culture and training are critical. And then he's got a couple of detailed questions. Do you have time to stick around for
Sure.
overtime? All right, yeah. So Scott, well, I hope you can stick around. We're recording this. If you can't, it'll be there. I wanted to, before we left the main section, can you tell us about your training? You've got an extensive training system at LCE.
So lifecycle engineering, one of our main divisions is the Lifecycle Institute, and that's been around for I guess about a decade or so, and it's exclusively training asset management professionals in maintenance, reliability, and asset management. That's what we do. We do some change management stuff in there as well. But we have all of our courses are designed by asset management professionals, delivered by asset management professionals. We have like our own consultants actually doing the delivery of those courses. And with the beginning of COVID, we were already on a path to start taking some of those from classroom-based courses to virtual instructor-led and e-learning. So now we have 3 modalities. We can either bring a course to you or have you come to our course, have you sit in a seat in a classroom. We can do a virtual instructor-led where it's just like this event that we're doing right now, live with an instructor, or we can do e-learning, which is self-paced. So it's very adept at wherever your organization needs to go and bringing everybody up to a standard.
Well, that's great. We are so happy to have LCE as an organizational member, and it's great to have your energy. We didn't even start talking about sailing or rock climbing or photography, but maybe in overtime, because by the clock on the wall, which is Nick, I can see we're towards the end of our actual session.
Yeah, and Jesse, if you have a few moments to stick around in overtime, I just want to thank everyone that only had half an hour to give to the program. And of course, thank again our September sponsor, ABS Group, our patron sponsors, ABS Quality Evaluations and Onuma System, as well as our organizational members, and again, LCE. And then make a quick plug for next week, Kimon Onuma, president of patron member Onuma System. And that's September 30th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And back to you.
Don't forget our 2 programs on Tuesday. really exciting programs. There's information on our website on that. So, okay, as much as I want to talk about sailing, and I was a volunteer crew on the Charlotte Ann, which is a tall ship in Lake
Really?
Michigan. Yeah,
Great.
and I lived in Singapore. Jesse was in Singapore. We've got this real incredible crossover. But let's put that aside and let's get into this question from Scott. It's a two-part question. Is tech getting easier, even though adoption rate is still low?
Is tech getting easier? I think tech is getting more user-friendly. I think there's a huge push to work with the graphic interface, the user interface, and to try to make the technology much more intuitive. So I think it is getting easier. However, I see a lot of software companies that do their own testing, with their own people that already know some of those tools. So that's doesn't always work out the way that you want it to. I think that as we get a little bit more able to integrate data across different systems, you're going to see those tools get more intuitive, more information driven rather than data driven, and start getting to the point where you're searching for, exactly what you're searching for. You're not just plugging in data. I'm not sure I answered that question, but
you did, and he's really digging into extending Maximo with mobility, IoT, RPA. It's getting easier, but companies are constrained to blocking and tackling. That was the theme at Maximo World this year. So
that's right.
I mean, if you were able to insert a nozzle and start reading information, then there is, that was a long time ago. It's got to be improving since then.
It is. Maximo has a new mobile component. The old mobile component was very frustrating for a lot of people. And there were some third-party firms that did a great job of extending Maximo. And, it's one thing to have a lot of information on your laptop screen, but trying to have that same amount of information reflected on an iPhone or even an iPad, you run out of real estate to work with there. So you really need to develop a mobile solution that gets the information to and from the edge, where people are needing the information or collecting that information, and understand how they're doing that. We ran into that problem with track inspections at Long Island Railroad. How do you go out and do a track inspection when you might have a lot of noise? You might be wearing gloves because it's cold. How do you enter that information into a tool? So it's coming a long way. It's got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. I think that it is the technology that's driving the dramatic benefits that we are seeing, and it's so complex, it's mind-blowing. And that's where I think ISO 55000 comes in, and it gives you a governance structure for dealing with the flood of opportunities that are coming. But that's just my opinion. So
I think that's a good opinion. And I think the other thing that ISO 55000 does, it makes you align your stakeholders throughout the organization, and sometimes beyond the organization, your external stakeholders as well, so that you're forced to think of, your asset management program from all different points of view, not just from a technology point of view.
That's a huge theme with the ALN from the very beginning. Jim Dieter has always been wanting to be more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable. And last year he introduced the Advancing Equity with Asset Leadership approach. And the panel that he envisioned has turned into a committee. I want to make it a board, but that's potato. It's the main theme. So there's another question from Scott that I'm going to take. He's talking about the GAO and a study that they conducted, GAO 19-57. That's 3, maybe even 4 years old now. And so that study actually encouraged a lot of agencies to start using ISO 55000. There had been the leaders, and they had presented at our events at the National Academies. The Western Area Power Administration Executive Director, Mark Gabrielle, said everybody should use ISO 55000. So there are federal agencies that are using it. Now, we also know that MAP 21, the infrastructure bill from 2016, required an asset management plan in order to get funding. And they put $1 million into the bill in order to teach people how to do asset management plans if they did not know. So when Bob Tusillo from the Federal Transit Administration presented to us, I asked him, so did ISO 55000? Oh yeah. That was all because of what ISO 55000 is. So it is already influencing the federal government. We've seen always a steady increase in the number of people who are using ISO 55000 in the federal government. We just need to get some of them to get certified, really show that the importance there. And then we've got Robert Kaufman asking, the near-term collaborative manner needs a push by OMB such that agencies might report their position in the maturity model when they submit their budget. So that's something we're also pushing on the legislative side. We want to continue this. You have to have a strategic asset management plan in order to get funding. It only makes sense. If we're going to give you money, show us how you're going to use it. That seems fair. But let me say that LCE does a lot of work with the federal government. So Jesse actually is probably very familiar with OMB. Do you want to take a crack at this and what you think the role of the OMB might be?
Yeah. So I do think that, okay, I'm going to answer a slightly different question there. So when you look at using ISO 55000 to get everybody to at least some sort of awareness and maturity, and whether that comes from the OMB or there's got to be some push to make everybody or the federal government agencies start to understand those principles of asset management and put them into their day-to-day operations and build it into their culture. That's extremely important. And everybody on this call understands why that's important, but looking at the future, as we look at public infrastructure, we look at organizations starting to build digital twins and how those public infrastructure assets, they're not just managed and owned and used by the agency that owns them, they're used by everybody. And when you start running into a resilience problem or any just day-to-day operations, the crossover between those different agencies is constant. So being able to use a framework like ISO 55000, getting everybody on the same page and the same level of understanding is going to facilitate the ability to start using digital twins, digital modeling, so that these infrastructure assets can work better together. You need a strong electrical grid to use your transit system. A hospital without a water system, without an electrical system, doesn't provide a whole lot of value. So these pieces in public infrastructure need to work together. ISO is great for bringing that awareness and that framework.
Jesse, Jack Kelly is very happy right now. Jack was at OMB for 36 years, and he is all about having the understanding of this sector approach and how the sectors interrelate to each other, and that a national asset leadership strategy is necessary in order to make that happen on a sector by sector basis. And I will speak for Jack Kelly also in that he does not think that OMB is going to be the driver of that. So Robert, to answer your question, we are working with OMB. We're hoping to have them present this year at the Department of State on November 10th. We'll see if they will bring their advancing equity at federal agencies team to present and tell the public what they've found so far, because we had submitted a paper to the transition team, the Biden-Harris transition team, called Advancing Equity with Asset Leadership. And then in March, OMB came out with an RFI on advancing equity at federal agencies. So either they saw our paper and even influenced the title, or we're just such on the same page that we're both talking about advancing equity in that same vein. And hopefully they'll be able to be public and tell us what they're doing, because part of what we're saying in this upcoming event is the best way to establish equity at any organization is to involve all relevant stakeholders. ISO 55000 4.2. So just doing that, you're gonna make things more difficult for yourself, because now you got to listen to everybody and incorporate what everybody's saying, and it's always harder to do that. But then you're going to have a better end product. Your mission is going to improve because you have included all the relevant stakeholders. So now I get to ask you, when was the last time you were out on the Spirit of South Carolina?
Oh, that's been a while. There's been so I was a volunteer crew on that tall ship. It's a beautiful ship, but I acquired my own sailboat and then a second little sailboat and a little one after that, and so I was kind of working on my own little fleet more than I was on the Spirit. But it's time to get back out there with those guys. They're getting ready to relaunch right now. In fact, they just finished their version of an asset management program and refurbished the ship.
So they were out of commission for a little bit.
Right.
Excellent. Well, the first time we get together to have a beer, I think is going to be a very late night.
Yes, I think so. That's for sure.
So it's been a pleasure talking with you. I look forward to working more on the paper and the upcoming presentations. And thank you for bringing your energy. It's really helping the Asset Leadership Network. And thanks to everybody who was kind enough to come and listen. And we look forward to, and thanks, Nick. And thanks to Nick's little Z plug for new birth. Nick's the new father. So that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Nick.
It's a pleasure, Jesse. Take care.